Hello everyone, this is Adya Malik and today we are going to do part 2 of the play Progress. This is from the first year English compulsory course. This is the course for the year 2020 and 2021. The play has been taken from the textbook prescribed by KPK Textbook Board. The play is written by Greer Ervine. You can watch the first part if you want to know about the characters, character sketches, summary and plot of the play. In this video, we are going to do comprehension questions which are given at the end of the play. So let's start with them. The first question is, what is the significance of the title of the play Progress? So Progress is a one-act play, so there are no divisions. It's just one act, start from till the end. It has been written in the backdrop of First World War. In this war, millions of people died and many more became disabled. Professor Corey invents a very powerful bomb. He claims that his invention would end the war as soon as it begins. This will happen by striking first and destroying the enemy. According to him, this is progress in the art of war. So he calls this progress. Although progress is a very positive word and it should be related to human life. If you improve human life, if you give them more facilities, if you give them clean water, more health facility, that should be called progress. But he called making of a deadly bomb progress in the art of war. But to her sister, it is destruction. Human progress is not measured by advancement in science and industry. It is measured by the value we put on a life. Hence, the title represents the theme of the play. It is also ironic because the play is not about progress, but actually destruction. So there are two people who define progress in two different ways. Professor Corey believes the more advanced you become in the art of war, the more progress you are. Whereas the sister believes that more value you put on life, that is called progress and not vice versa. Now, what is the central idea of the play? We have already discussed that the play Progress is written in the background of First World War. In the war, thousands were butchered and many became disabled for life. The central idea of the play is the conflict between the viewpoint of those who are in favor of war and those who are against war. The play also exposes the motives behind wars. Wars are imposed by those who benefit from selling weapons. They remain secure far behind the fighting lines. Only the poor sacrifice their life in the trenches. So war is basically about profits, about making money. So the only people who get any benefit out of wars are the people who are selling the weapons, selling the aircraft, selling the missiles, selling the bombs, because they don't lose anything. The only people that lose are the people who are sending their sons into the battle and they are butchered over there. They are killed over there. So the main idea is wars should be abolished. The main idea is that peace should be propagated. Peace should be endorsed. Describe the climax of the play Progress in the View. Climax is where the play totally changes. That's the tip of the play where it goes up and then it reaches a climax and then a change happens. The climax of the play comes when Mrs. Melton is convinced that her brother Professor Corey will not suppress his invention at any cost. She decides to destroy his invention. He destroyed the sheet of paper on which Corey has written the formulae. But Corey says that the formulae are in his brain and he can reproduce them easily. Mrs. Melton cannot tolerate his inhumanity anymore. She decides to kill him. So that is the changing. That is a turning point. When Corey stoops to pick up the sheets, she stabs him in the back with a knife and kills him. So that's the climax of the play. But with the climax comes the end of the play also. Now, looking at the next question, what is a one-act play? Illustrated with examples from the play Progress. Now, a one-act play is a play that has only one act. So the answer is in the term itself, because usually the plays that are acted out on theatre, on stage, they have 4 or 5 acts to them. Like Shakespeare's Macbeth had 5 acts, and then other plays usually of that time were divided into 5 acts, and then each act had different scenes in them. 5 scenes, 7 scenes, etc. But one-act play is more like a short play, and it does not change any setting. It happens in the same place. It begins in the same place. It ends in the same place, and it just has one act. That's it. It consists of only one or more scenes. It is usually written concisely, so it's quite brief, quite short. It deals with a single situation and the aim at producing a single effect. It deals with only one theme developed through one situation to one climax to produce maximum impact. So we do not have multiple stories in one act plays. We just have one problem and one solution coming out of it. So all the focus is on that. Progress by St. John Greer Ervine is an excellent example of one act play. It has a unity of theme which is the abolition of war. We just have one theme. It is a brief piece of writing, so it's very short. It depicts the unities of time, place, and action. The time doesn't change, it starts and ends within an hour. The place remains the same, that is the laboratory of Professor Corey. And the action is also single, that Professor wants to glorify his invention, and Mrs. Milton is trying to convince him to destroy his invention. The theme of the play has been developed through only one situation, which is the laboratory of Professor Corey. It ends with one climax when Mrs. Milton is convinced that her brother will not suppress his invention at any cost, and she decides to destroy the invention. When she is unable to suppress the invention, she kills her brother. So that's one act, one story, single conclusion. That's it. What is the plot? Write down the plot of the play progress. We have already talked about it, so you can read from here, and you can go back to the previous video in which I have talked about the plot in detail. Plot is basically the sequencing of the events in a story. What happened first, what happened next, what was the rising action, what was the climax, how was the conclusion achieved, etc. So you can read from here, or you can read the summary and the plot from the previous video. The next question is write the character sketch of Mrs. Milton. Again, this has been addressed quite in detail in the previous video, so you can watch that video again. But here I'll just give you some common points. Mrs. Milton is the sister of Professor Corey, so that's the relationship. She's a widow. She is mourning her son's death. She's sensitive, has the ability to stay composed while talking about her loss. She hates war. She thinks war are an organized butchery of boys. She remembers loving memories of her family, and so often Professor Corey's heart, and teach him the beauty of relation. To soften Professor Corey's heart and to teach him the beauty of relation. See, she is emotionally broken when she informs Professor that a shell killed Eddie, because it was quite recently that she realized how her son actually died. She thought that he had a peaceful death and the body was intact, etc., and he had a proper burial. But recently a friend came back from war, and he told her that Eddie and other friends were blown to pieces. There was no dead body. So she was quite devastated by that news. She calls her brother bloodless fool when he tells her of his invention and of the destruction it can cause. She wants to save humanity and requests Professor to suppress his formula. Suppress means destroy it, don't use it. His refusal makes her smash the table and spill the formula. Knowing that the formula is in his mind, she stabs a knife into his back and kills him. So that is Mrs. Milton. Although she looks very meek and very mild, almost like a broken woman, but when it comes to saving humanity, when it comes to saving other mothers from the same kind of a loss that she is feeling, she becomes very strong, and she could even take the life of her own brother. Draw the character sketch of Professor Corey, a despiser or hater of humanity. Professor Corey is a bachelor, so he was never married, he never had a family, never had children, so he doesn't realize what happens to people when they lose their children. He's aged between 50 and 60. He's rude and cruel to the maidservant, his sister as well. He's heedless to family relations, doesn't care about them. He's greedy for fame and fortune. He underrates women and says that they have no capacity for impersonal devotion, and hence they have never been great scientists. So he demeans women a lot. He shows his cruel attitude towards humanity while describing the devastating effects of his bomb. Besides his evil nature, he also speaks of factual points. He believes that the war will never end because humans are pugnacious by nature. So he believes that even if he does not make a weapon, the war is not going to end because somebody else is going to make a weapon, and then somebody else is going to have a war. And he believes that human beings are always going to have war in one part of the world or the other, because war is all about profits. So the greed is basically the reason why wars happen. What type of mother in Mrs. Milton? Illustrate through her character that the theme of literature are universal. So when we look at Mrs. Milton, we realize that mothers are the same, and the love between a mother and a son is same everywhere. It doesn't really matter whether you are from England or Germany or India or Pakistan. All the mothers are the same, and they love their sons in the same way. So she brings up her son in a very affectionate manner. She wanted to make him great. She takes care of his education. She has memories of innocent pleasure when she enjoyed with her son. A universal theme is an idea that applies to anyone, regardless of the cultural differences or the geographical location. So it doesn't really matter whether you're from Europe or Asia or Africa, these feelings remain the same everywhere. It is an idea about human conditions. It is a generalization about life of human nature. It deals with basic human concerns. So it doesn't really matter where you are from, you feel the same way about the loss of a child. The play Progress shows the love of a mother for her son and her grief at his death. It's a universal theme. It exists across all cultures and societies. Um, was she justified in killing her brother? Mrs. Melton committed a crime by killing his brother, Professor Corey. She did not have the right to commit such an act of madness, but on the other hand, her act seemed to be justified for the sake of humanity. Although it is wrong to take somebody's life, but in this case, if she hadn't, then something very catastrophic could have happened. Sometimes a drastic and violent action becomes essential to crush wicked elements. After killing her brother, she justifies her act by saying, "Eddie dear, I had to, Eddie." Thus, she exalts herself in the viewer's eyes and expects that they adore her as a protector of humanity. So she had to make a choice, either let her brother go and let millions of people die, or kill her brother and save millions of people from death. So she chose the other choice. Although it is wrong, it is not justifiable, but you can say that she chose a lesser evil in comparison to a bigger evil. That was, if the bomb would go out, it would kill millions. What was the cause of the quarrel between Mrs. Melton and Professor Corey? Mrs. Melton was a kind person. She has an affectionate nature, but her brother, Professor Corey, is cruel and cunning. He invents a very powerful bomb. He claims that his invention would end a war as soon as it begins. This will happen by striking first and destroying the enemy. He has no regard for humanity and human life. Mrs. Melton has herself suffered the brutalities of war. She has lost her only son. So she knows how devastating that can be. And her husband also died because of a broken heart, because when he lost his son, he could not survive. She understands the grief of other mothers. Therefore, she asks her brother to suppress his invention. He refuses. This was the cause of the quarrel between Mrs. Melton and Professor Corey. It was not about money. It was not about any material thing, but it was about saving people. Next is contrast the characters Mrs. Melton and Professor Corey, highlighting the dominant traits. Traits are characteristics, qualities of their personality. Again, it's going to be a repetition. Mrs. Melton is totally opposite to her brother Corey. Mrs. Melton is frank because she tells her brother he is not a good substitute of her son. She describes herself as an ordinary woman without any pretensions. She wants Professor Corey to think about Eddie just as she thinks about him. Professor Corey, on the other hand, is obsessed with his invention. He wants fame and fortune. He wants money. It doesn't matter to him how many innocent people will be killed by his invention. Mrs. Melton is obsessed with the death of her son. His death has made her realize how brutal war can be. She is against wars. The dominant trait of their personality is that both the brother and the sister are extremist in their views. So Professor Corey is on one extreme and Mrs. Melton is on the other. If Professor Corey is unemotional, Mrs. Melton is too emotional. If Professor Corey is pro-war, Mrs. Melton is against war. What is the conflict is more like what was the cause of the disagreement between them. So the conflict is that the play is anti-war, pro-war and anti-war. It's a conflict between somebody who likes war, that is Professor, and somebody who hates war, that is Mrs. Melton. So it's a powerful anti-war play in which two characters are there and two of them have totally opposite ideology. One is pro-war and the other one is anti-war. So the conflict is between them. They have a personal conflict and they have an ideological conflict as well. Suggest another ending. What could it end otherwise? If Mrs. Melton had not killed her brother, what would have happened? Progress by St. John Greer Ervine was written in the backdrop of World War I. The First World War left two dominant ideologies, pro-war and anti-war. Another ending of the play may be in which Professor Corey eventually agrees with his sister. ये भी हो सकता था कि वो agree कर जाता. Mrs. Melton and suppresses an invention. Although this would have also resolved the conflict, it would be unrealistic. As Professor Corey says, war will never end. Because humans are pugnacious by nature, this revolution of the conflict would also make the play less powerful. But because it ended with the death, and especially death of the brother at the hands of a sister, so that is much more powerful end. If he would have just been convinced, that would have been a very weaker play. But that because we are asked of another ending, so that can be another ending. that Professor Corey was convinced. So the next question is, true progress means the destroying of the means of destruction. Elaborate the statement in the light of the play Progress. So we need to explain this sentence here, this notion, that destroying of the means of destruction is true progress. Progress by St. John Greer Ervine was written in the backdrop of the First World War, in which thousands were butchered and many more became disabled for life. It left many mothers childless and a large number of widows and orphans. Orphans are children who have lost their parents. War brings devastation, so there's no question about it. Professor Corey is of the view that the only way to end a war is to make powerful means of destruction. He believes that in order to end a war, you need to make it very destructive. The more destructive it is, in less number of days it would end. According to Professor Corey, progress is having powerful means of destruction and using it first to obliterate the enemy. So it is always about who strikes first. You strike first and you have this massive weapon of destruction, and the enemy would be totally obliterated and you will win, and that is the end of war. In the play, Professor Corey symbolizes means of destruction. Mrs. Meldon continuously argues with Professor Corey to suppress his invention, which is a powerful means of destruction. When she is unable to convince him, she kills him. That is, she destroys the means of destruction. Thus, according to the play, true progress lies in the destruction of the means of destruction. True progress is not weapon advancement. True progress is not having a more mechanized war. True progress is when you value human life more than you value weapons and money, etc. So in this play also, because Professor Corey symbolized bombs and death and war, so when Mrs. Meldon kills him, she is destroying one means of war at least. So one less person to make a powerful bomb. There are others, but that is what she could do. So that is, for her, that is progress. How was Eddie killed? Eddie is the son of Mrs. Meldon, and he is also the nephew of Professor Corey. The commander of the battalion wrote to Mrs. Meldon that a piece of shell had killed her son. Eddie and he had been buried behind the line somewhere, but a colleague of her son told her that a shell hit him in their trench and killed 5 of them. It mutilated their bodies. Mutilated means they were totally destroyed. They were blown to pieces. Eddie was not buried, and there was nothing left to bury because his body was in pieces. They could not find his body, and that is why he was not given a proper burial. Although the commander of the battalion wrote earlier, and he told a lie to Mrs. Meldon that Eddie was given a proper funeral and he was buried in a proper grave, but now she realizes that the son did not even have a grave because the body was in pieces. Describe the physical and mental condition of Mrs. Meldon after the death of her son Eddie. So Mrs. Meldon loves her son very much. She is deeply devoted to his memories. She is a bereaved mother. Bereaved means somebody who is grieving the loss of a loved one. She has a loving husband and a son before the war, but after the war she feels that she is cruelly alone. She's obsessed with the death of her son. His death made her emotional. It has made her realize the brutalities of war. She turns against war. This has made her an extremist in her views. So before war she had everything. She had a lovely son, she had a loving husband, but after the war she's alone. She's a widow and she's a person who has lost the only son. So she became a totally different person, very sentimental and very anti-war. Why does Mrs. Meldon hate war? So there's a lot of repetition in these questions. We already have answered it. Mrs. Meldon is against war. She lost her son in the war. On the death of their only son, her husband also died of a broken heart. She is too emotional. She feels that she is cruelly alone. She thinks that this is all because of war. She calls war an organized butchery. Butchery means to butcher somebody with the knife, like we butcher animals. So she hates war to such an extent that she is willing to side with the mothers of the enemy soldiers. She feels that the mothers of the enemy soldiers must be suffering in the same way as she is. So she becomes a universal symbol of motherhood, and she does not believe in being German mother or the English mother, because Germans were the enemies in World War I of the English troops. But she believes that a loss is a loss. And when a mother loses a child, it doesn't really matter whether she loses on this side of the border or the other side of the border, because the loss of a child is the greatest loss in the world. What is Mrs. Meldon's view about war? We have already discussed it like 10 times. Mrs. Meldon thinks that war is insensible devastation. She hates war. When Professor Corey mentions that his invention will create a revolution in the field of war, she thinks that her brother has invented something which would abolish war. So when he initially tells her that I have made something that is going to end war, she's so happy because she's thinking that, oh, he has finally come up with some way of stopping war. But the abolition of war is a subject close to her heart. In her view, war is an organized manner in which young soldiers are slaughtered and brutally killed. So she does not believe in war at all. She believes that war is not a solution. What is Professor Corey's view about war? We also know what his views are. He's pro-war, he's a profit hungry, he's looking for fame, he's looking for money, and he's totally insensitive when it comes to human life. Professor Corey thinks that wars will never end because humans are pugnacious by nature. Pugnacious means they can't stop fighting. So they are always going to be looking for one reason or the other to fight. He thinks that the only thing one can do in the end is end a war quickly as possible. This, according to him, is possible by inventing a very, very powerful bomb and using it first. In this way, the enemy will be obliterated, totally destroyed, and the war will come to an end very soon. He is insensitive to any loss of human life in warfare. He is unemotional. He is materialistic. He sees war as an opportunity to make a fortune. And he's always looking for fame also. He wants to be famous for inventing such a catastrophic weapon that could kill millions in 1 second. Bring out the ideological conflict between Mrs. Meldon and Professor Corey. I think this has been answered also previously under the title of what was the main conflict. But just to go through it again, it's in the backdrop of war, etc. Come down here. Professor Corey represents the pro-war ideology. Pro means in favor of war ideology, and Mrs. Meldon presents an anti-war ideology, so she is against it. Both of them are extremists in their views. According to Mrs. Meldon, warfare is insensible devastation. She thinks that war is an organized manner in which young soldiers are slaughtered and brutally killed. On the other hand, Professor Corey thinks that warfare will never end, and humans are pugnacious by nature. He thinks that the only thing one can do is end a war as quickly as possible. This, according to him, is possible by inventing a very powerful bomb and using it first. In this way, the enemy will be obliterated and the war will come to an end. This ideological conflict between the two characters continues as sharp dialogues throughout the play. This conflict ends as violently as war itself, with the killing of Professor Corey by Mrs. Meldon. Obviously, when you are pro-war or anti-war, you are taking the side of violence or you are taking the side of peace. So Professor Corey, because he was a very violent person himself, he ended in a very violent way. His life ended in a very violent way. And what would be more catastrophic than to be killed by your own sister? So that's a very devastating kind of end to the play. But this also shows that it is the same kind of killing. If you kill one person, it is the same kind of loss. When you kill millions of people, that is again the same kind of loss to other people and their families. So war is not an answer to anything. People should solve their problems by talking, by having a dialogue, by negotiating, etc. Because war does not solve anything. A very famous quote from Winston Churchill, he was the Prime Minister of England. He said that there are no victors in war, there are two losers. So nobody wins a war because both sides are facing a lot of devastation, a lot of loss. So there are two losers, means that both sides lose. One loses less and the other one loses more. And on that category, we define who's the winner and who's the loser. But basically, when it comes to war, there is no victor. There is nobody who has won the war ever. So that's the end of the play. If you have any more questions, you can ask. Please like the video and comment if you have any questions. Share it with your friends and also subscribe the channel. Thanks for watching.